This is an old oak desk or table that I found at a yard sale for $10. It was pretty beat up, but I liked the style and thought it had potential. It was also pretty dirty, so I'm cleaning it up. This raises all kinds of questions for me about how clean I want it. I have already scrubbed off the dirt and the pieces of paper that were stuck to it. This has revealed that what looked like a nice reddish rust patina is actually globs of paint that were splashed out of a paint can when someone used the old table as a workbench. At least this is what I surmise by the paint can-sized ring on the table and the shape and thickness of the blobs and what I think were drips. I can remove the paint, but then I also remove the impetus to contemplate who did the painting, whether or not they had help, and from whom, what were they thinking about, caring about, what time of day was it, what season. The same is true of the slight gouges at the edges of the table. They seem to be places where a saw scraped across the surface. Someone lay a piece of lumber across this makeshift workbench or table, and occasionally, probably unintentionally, dropped the saw down too low and skidded it across the table. The tabletop boards are thick enough that I could sand or even plane down the wood so that it would look brand new. But then it would be a much more generic-looking oak desk, not the good old thing to which I was first attracted. So I am left with this question about how much of the old mysteries to remove and how much to keep to connect me to a time and people I did not personally know. I think we could ask these same questions about much of what we see around us. Several years ago, a friend took me to see a cabin he had recently bought in Southern Cross, an almost ghost town above Georgetown Lake in western Montana. The old ghost town had the same kind of appeal for me as the table. Although it has been listed on the map as a ghost town, the town has been inhabited consistently since the late 1800s. The town grew up around a mining operation. The Southern Cross Mining Company built a bunkhouse for the miners, a hotel, a forge, and equipment barns. As the miners settled in, the mining company granted the miners leases on company property upon which they could build dwellings, with the understanding that if ore was discovered under or near one of the houses, the owner would have to remove or relinquish the building in the interest of ore extraction. That never happened. The town was a thriving community through the 40s. By mid-century, however, the mine was no longer profitable and the mine was shut down. This, of course, had major implications for the community. People had to leave to find work elsewhere, and the character of the community changed. But it did not die. In fact, this ghost town was still very much alive. Some of the miners were retired or close to it and kept their homes as their primary residence. Others moved, but used their old homes as vacation or getaway cabins. Some places were passed to family members. Others were sold outright. Some were simply abandoned. By the time I arrived with my camera in the summer of 1999, there were no longer any of the old-time miners living in Southern Cross. I returned the next year, only to learn that the current residents had been told to move or vacate their homes. A new owner had taken over the property. Some residents agreed. Others wanted to try to resist the order. But all felt that the town that they loved should not disappear forever without a trace. Because this ghost town hadn't given up the ghost. These were people's homes, a community with living and evolving traditions that valued and honored what had been passed down to them, and wove that history into their daily lives in western Montana. Although not everything in Southern Cross was picturesque, and many of the buildings were beyond repair, many of the homes, grounds, and artifacts are exactly what people in other parts of the U.S. are striving to create, both aesthetically and socially. Open any issue of Country Living or Home and Garden, and you will see panoramas and close-ups of the kind of unique and personal living spaces the residents of Southern Cross created for themselves. The footage you see here exists because the people of Southern Cross loved their town and what it had to offer and wanted to preserve it in some form. Southern Cross has struck me as a very interesting place. It's got a lot of history to it, and what I understand is that things here are about to change. And I'm interested in following how all that comes about. So I want to ask you some questions about what it means to you to live here, what it is about this place that you value, how you came here, why you've stayed.
Let's see. There's a lot of thoughts packed into that. Let me start with why I came here. I came here because it was a wonderfully beautiful recreation area with some really quaint old mining cabins on it, and I was able to land one for a reasonable price. But I stayed for much more significant reasons, I think, and that's because there's a community of people here that values the place, values the land, values the history, and values their sense of community in a way that's more profound than anything I've found anyplace else that I've ever lived. So I've stayed mostly because of those people, and that's where my loyalty is. But there's also, of course, still the loyalty to the historicity of this place. You know, these beautiful architecture of this old mining camp that's soon not going to exist anymore.
Well, I'm interested in the relationship between people and land, and people and place. And so I'm wondering, can you tell me if you feel like this place has given you anything, and or if you've given anything to this place? What is your connection to it? You talked about the people. What about the place?
Personally, for me, probably not. Very much, at least, because I haven't been here very long. I've only been here since the mid-90s. So I identify with sort of the sense that this, like much of the rest of Montana, is kind of the last best place, and it's fading, it's going away. It's being stolen by a sense of values that doesn't really care whether these buildings stay, whether the record of the many generations of Finnish people who lived here is left for anybody to even know about or care about. Have I contributed to that personally, as you know, in terms of the land or the place? I couldn't really say that I have, but there are others who have.
Mm-hmm. So for you, the history is very important. Yeah, I think the history is a key thing. We throw our history away so quickly in this country, and so comfortably it seems. And it's sad that we forget those generations who've lived and toiled in places and died in places. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's certainly been hard and difficult because there were times when there was no money, and certainly long winters that last sometimes 7, if not 8 months. Yet the summers would come, and they were certainly encouraging because not only would my neighbors and friends encourage me to continue to do the great work that I was doing, but in the summer months, tourists come from various parts of the country because they see Southern Cross in the ghost town books, and they want to partake a little bit of Montana history as well as American history. And then they would just wander up and look at the old buildings, and I happen to be around, and we'd talk, and they'd say, "Great job, carry on." And a lot of that was enough for me to continue to do it, even though I didn't have much money or resources. I tried to use salvage materials where I could find them, and because of that encouragement, and as well as just the beauty of the area, good water, a system, a spring that we developed on the mountainside as a community, all had those aspects which made it a safe place to live, which was a big part of it. And there certainly wasn't any financial support in doing this, or being mayor, as they call me. I mean, that was more a labor of love and just being a watchdog of the town when sometimes there'd be no one here, just myself. And I felt that, if anything, I was preserving a bit of American history, not for my own sake, not that I didn't enjoy it, but certainly because I felt that the people that did come here really appreciated it, and for future generations it would continue. Well, I think as Americans go, we don't have very much history to begin with other than what's in books. You know, we can drive to this museum or that thing. So as far as living history, I think this is one place that it's actively gone on, and I find that living history, at least those of us that appreciate there are elders that came before us, you know, even though those elders are no longer with us, their handiwork their construction, their building, and their stories that still exist are present within those of us here. So it's not a museum in that way where you look through the display cases and that's all you see. You know, you have an actual interaction with the place and the items used in the homes or the cabins, the wood stoves or the tinware plates or the old glasses that still exist here. So because of that, you have an actual interaction with the past that I think certainly there are other places in the country that could and probably do have this in some extent, but each place is unique, and this one's made it to this present time because of those individuals that cared for it and wanted to share that with the greater culture, and that's why everyone's thought it's great place.
Oh God, the old people. It was great. We had 2 Finnish gentlemen that were, one died at 75 and one at 90, and not so long ago. And they were really unique individuals because they were living alone. They had had marriages, but the women have been out of their lives for a long time, have moved on, passed on. They were men who, to the day they died, were chopping wood, were cooking on wood cook stoves, heating with wood, were taking their saunas once a week. They had this great, men had this great relationship. Jussi had an old 51 Chevy car, and Lilian had the driver's license. And so once a month, Lilian would drive Jussi and his dog Poika to town, to Anaconda, which is 20 miles away, and get their groceries and supplies. And they took care of themselves that way. But every day, except for Sunday, they would drive down to the mailboxes, which is 2 miles down the road, and wait for the mail. And Lilian would walk Poika while Jussi sat in the car, and they'd get the mail, and they would come back. But the coolest thing was prior to going to get the mail, there was sort of a signal from Jussi. He would open his garage doors. That's time for Lilian to come up, have a cup of coffee, and then they would go get the mail and get the paper. And it was a great little ritual. And then the other neatest thing about Lilian, he's our idol. We had a code in Southern Cross, and this is all part of why I loved it, about being minimalists. And we were going to be like Lilian. Well, Lilian parked his car in the 60s, never drove again, and we liked that. And then he would get his firewood by walking up into these woods behind the town, and with a handsaw, he'd handsaw these little pecker pole lodge poles, 3 or 4 inch wide. And he'd put them in a little harness, and he'd hike down to his cabin, and he'd saw them up. And he'd do this all summer long. And pretty soon, he has a winter supply of wood, which is a fair amount for being at 7,000 feet. And he'd stack it perfectly. And he would just use his little wood stove, and he'd start a morning fire, and then just an evening fire. And he was real minimalist, and we liked it. And this man, Lilian, was always happy. He always had a smile on his face. Jussi, he could be a little grumpy, but Jussi would have a sauna every Saturday, and he would take his sauna, and then he would invite all the women. And so we'd come in, and we'd have napsu, which was whiskey and beer, and then we'd go take our sauna, and then we'd all come out, and we'd look like him, all clean and neat, and drink some more napsu whiskey, and we'd go home. And so it was fun. Jussi was always a ladies' man, and up until he was 90, he still loved the women. And he was always good to us women, and each woman in turn took care of him, like Gretchen first, then Christina, then Kathy, me intermediate, because I'd be coming and going, and other women, and spend more time with him, write his letters for him, drink coffee with them, make sure he was okay and stuff. And so that was really cool. But we have one more classic woman who at 90 died, and that was Lila, and she was Queen of the Mountain. And she was an incredible woman. This woman had energy to the day she died, healthy, vibrant. That's what was so beautiful about these people. And maybe that's part of what we pick up on this town. Maybe it's all that good energy. And I feel they're my idols. I feel like there's no reason why I can't chop wood till I'm 90 and in my 70s, 80s, and 90s, because it's all in your mind. If you keep doing it, you do it. You don't lose it, It's just simple. It's simple life that works.
So, Bill, I understand that you first came here with Roy.
That's right. About 4 or 5 years ago, I would say.
And you've come back since then.
Several times I've been back, yes.
What is it that made you want to come back up here?
Well, I always have such a great time here. There's so many nice people to talk to, and we have a lot of fun. But also the beauty of the place is just stunning. And the history of the place, you really have a sense of being in something that has been going on for a good 100 years or so. So there's just a real living presence of the people who have, lived and toiled and died here.
So are you a history buff?
Not particularly, but I mean, here you don't really have to be a history buff to see it around you everywhere. I mean, it's just so vivid. And everywhere you go, there's something that you will find really amazing.
What do you think is the neatest thing about this place?
Well, it's hard to pick one particular thing. I suppose it's the community, the sense of strong community that's here, and the deep bonds that people have with the place and with one another, and with the whole project of trying to preserve this really remarkable site for future generations.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure.
What do you think are the most important things that you've gotten from living here?
Probably the most important is the friendships, the sharing. That's really been vital. To see people help each other and care about each other, be it our old people or people our age. I think that's the most important thing, that sharing, that we care about what happens to each other. It's also, again, going back to just that being in the mountains. That's so important to me, to be in the mountains and have the space. Again, the trees, the good water. That's good for my soul. It's peaceful. And Southern Cross has always been peaceful. Even if there's things going on out there in the world, there's something about Southern Cross. It's always been very peaceful energy, and that's what people pick up on when they come here. And they pick up on that peace, and that's what we picked up on. That's why I stayed in this community, because of that peaceful feeling. We weren't like the normal world that did a 40-hour work week. We valued time. Time is really important to us. So Southern Cross gave me that essence of being able to have that time to enjoy our lives, to know that having a cup of coffee or some tea with a neighbor in the morning was valuable, as opposed to rushing off to having to do something, to make some money, to do something else, where we were able to make what we needed to survive. And that's very valuable. It gets me back in touch with that simpler side of life, and that I love where the indigenous people came from, and I'm obviously steps up from that, but that simplicity of life is so valuable and so important to our center and to our calmness. And that's what Southern Cross has given me, and that's what I have given back to Southern Cross. It's never created any kind of strange energy in me. It's been very peaceful energy up until recently.
So tell me a little bit about what is the best experience that you've had up here, and conversely, what's the worst experience you've had up here?
Oh, goodness. The best experience, there have been too many to count or even remember. There have been some remarkable experiences here, mostly with people, not necessarily residents, but often including the residents. But typically the sort of open and inviting way that this community seems to bring people to life and incite creativity and fun and the willingness to do things, help other people too. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again up here. Worst? Oh, gosh. I think the day the eviction notices came out.
And that's worse than any 40 degrees below zero?
Oh, yeah. 40's easy.
Have you been up here when it's 40 below?
Uh-huh.
What's it like?
Cold. You plug your car in at night if you want to start it at all. And if you're smart, you don't bother.
Mm-hmm. How often does that happen?
Oh, anymore, probably every couple or 3 years maybe, that it gets that cold. Below zero is not uncommon, but that cold is pretty uncommon.
Just the simple things of daily life that have now, in this time and era, kind of fallen by the wayside. You know, where you do your own wood and you cook with it and bake your own bread. no matter what the outside world is doing, those are basically simple things that I think that a lot of people would wish that they knew how to do, because it's only for the betterment of not only oneself but the culture to, because you can give those things in return to others. And I think that's one thing I've certainly learned is of giving to others. Well, I guess they've started calling me mayor because sometimes I was the only one here in the town, often, during the summers especially, when other neighbors or friends were off to work, regular employment, garnering income, where I felt that I needed to be here to, if anything, oversee the place so that certain people wouldn't take things. So that was kind of an overseeing job, and questioning people who may be doing that. So it kind of became this authoritarian kind of role almost, as well as knowing the resources of materials that were around town, and that when someone had a problem with their cabin or we had a problem with the water system, I was often available to deduce what the problem was and attempt to fix it collectively or on my own. And so simply, it wasn't too long before they started calling me mayor, for better or worse. It's certainly not a high-paying job. There's no money in mayoring, I've often said. And but the rewards of it, I guess, have been that because of my expertise or knowledge that I've gained from so many years, I think that anyone in a similar position would also find themselves being called mayor if they are willing to put in the time and be open-hearted and giving towards the community, whether it's people visiting or the neighbors. Yeah, correct. I at least kept them up so that at a future time they at least would continue into the present, so that if there was a chance that they could be restored more fully, that could happen. But once the roofs go in, which have happened in the last few years to some of them, just because I've kind of given up on the mayoring thing under the circumstances.
What are the circumstances?
The circumstances of having been here for so many years and encouraged to, say, be here and kind of do this work, and then finding that some developers, through an inside deal, acquired the property, and once they acquired it, unbeknownst to us, they had way different plans for the town, meaning that everything that those of us that had spent time here, let alone the tourists who came from across the country, were now going to find that the town no longer existed as a ghost town or a town that held historic structures. The current change of events that are probably about to happen momentarily, any day or week now, is that those of us that are residents now get to remove our structures, our possessions, and in the next 3 months, and everything thereafter becomes, say, the new owners. But the understanding is that they're going to demolish everything, and it won't look anything like it does now. So it's definitely been a change of heart, and we're all quite disappointed by it. Where to go, what to do, that's a whole other question.
Right now I hear a big bulldozer going on down there, and what that does to me, it's like, it just rips at me. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't fill me. It's like sometimes I have to go inside and close the door so that I don't hear it, And that's the sad part about what's happening. It's like, to think that they're going to just come and take some bulldozers and bulldoze down these places that we love, that we've cared about, that we've built. I mean, Bobby's taken a house that was just a metal shack and made it into a beautiful home with all native stuff. Carl did the same thing. Everybody's done a little bit on their places, They can't do this. It isn't right. Why isn't it that we can't share this? Why isn't it that they can't share this land with us, but not on their terms? Why can't we come together and say, okay, let's take our simple life, and let's take your advanced life, and let's come somewhere in the middle so it works for everybody. So it's not just about you, and it's not just about us, and it's about other people that come to this town and that become a part of it. Why can't we go there? Why is there so much greed in this world? And that is a question that I would like to ask them. I have invited the developers to come up here and talk to me and share their stories, because I would ask them that. I would directly say, why?
Have they replied to your request?
No, I just wrote, what happened is that they came up a couple weeks ago and they wandered around behind my cabin. And when they came back, I found out who it was, and I thought, you know, this is absurd. It's like, they own the land, we own the cabins, we have something in common. It's like, come and talk to me. I will tell you about the water systems, I will tell you about this land, I will tell you about what you own here. Let's talk as adults. When we did the settlement conference, it was separate rooms. It's always been this us and them. And it's like, it's hard on me as a woman, as an emotional woman, and as an adult, that we are like treated like children, and we deal with them on the same level, and it's like, can't we just be people and work it out? How are we ever going to stop wars if we can't even as two people come together and talk? So I sent the letters off, real short and simple letters. I didn't want to get too involved. And I haven't heard, I don't know if I'll ever hear, I don't know if they'll ever come. I got the feeling when I tried to talk to them at the settlement conference that they didn't want to know that I was a person. You know, that I really am not just some freeloading, you know, person up here. That they don't want to know that we're real people, that we really have souls, you know. And I think that's why they've got to keep up this pretense. They're telling us to blame the mining company. Blame the mining company for not letting us know and not selling it to us. Well, okay, I'm not going to blame anybody, but yeah, the mining company should have told us. But this is how they're appeasing their soul. Oh, it's not our fault. I'm going, but yeah, it is. You know, come on, let's work this out. Let's not change. How can you change? How can you destroy over 100 years of history here, you know?
So what would you like to see happen to this place?
Well, ideally, I guess I'd like to see it stay as much as possible the same. Recognizing that the world changes, I guess what I would really like to see long term is some kind of a historic preservation trust created to keep the main parts of town here as intact as possible and looking as authentic as possible. Probably the development of a museum out of something perhaps like the boarding house or some other facility that could go back to the mining days and portray that, because that's being lost quickly. I'd like to see a concerted effort at doing oral history of the people who do remember the mining days, because they're few in number and getting fewer every day. And then finally, I guess, in recognition of the fact that the world has to change, I would like to see development, if it has to happen, and it probably will, as being done in a manner that's consistent with the heritage that's here. And I think that would be possible for people with imagination. The current owners appear to not have any.
Well, I see that if the place has to change and be developed, I'd like to see the cabins continue as they have been, used as private residences or for guests. I'd like to see the two large two-story buildings here turned into places that would accommodate more guests, as well as a place for people to come and have healings, such as, you know, massage, have sauna, have some rest and relaxation, and kind of do away with their clocks and telephones and come to a neutral space of beauty where they have a whole new outlook on life when they go back out in the world, just like I've had the opportunity to do in this place. And ultimately, I guess that's what I'd like to see this place become, as it has for a good number of us, but I'd like to see it be, in a sense, a little more commercial, and people who enjoy the hiking and the natural beauty of the area to come and absorb that into their being and take it wherever they go. So maybe a small, limited goal, but probably in the long run, a very beneficial one in this current society and culture. I would hope that the spirit of Southern Cross and all that it's meant to the individuals that have spent time here will certainly carry on in their hearts and souls, and that if the place doesn't exist as we've known it, that at least it's within and all that we've learned and experienced is an integral part of us. And we'll share that in the greater world wherever we go, even though the place itself may not exist. And that's the way it's sounding. And you know, if they do another type of community with removing all the old stuff, and it's only a rich man's place, you know, with homes that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you know, it's never going to be like it was. And I suppose that's their loss, or perhaps the world's loss, if not a little bit of Montana's loss, that no longer exists in this way. So the person who wants to come and find a little bit of history or a respite from the crazy world, you know, they're not going to find it here, and it's going to be harder to find. So the best thing we can do is document it and share it, and keep that spirit alive within us, and take what we've learned because of that and carry on.
In the fall of 2001, the buildings of Southern Cross were burnt down and the ground was bulldozed. Now the new owners will develop this acreage that was once Southern Cross. I cannot help but wonder what it will look like. Perhaps new people will come here to fish and ski and relax with their families and friends. What I wonder about, however, is whether or not it was necessary to drive out the previous inhabitants and destroy all those irreplaceable historic buildings and artifacts that held within them the story and the history of the past 100+ years. Something is gained by having convenient appliances and comforts, but something is also lost. Traces of the past are erased forever. Meanwhile, back at home, my old table is serving a new generation of users. I left most of the stains and scratches in place, and I hope I will not be too upset when new ones arrive. They are, after all, testaments or records of life well lived, and I hope will be valued as such. I personally don't think that newer is always better. It's nice to have records of history.